Welcome back to Detailed, an original podcast by RCAT. This is a show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Cherise Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guest today is Luke Waldron, Associate and Senior Architect at Cumulus Studio, with 4 offices in Australia. Luke's diverse international design experience spans the public, education, and health sectors, including the Dove Lake Viewing Shelter within the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area, the Wildlife Conservation Society Research Station in Sulawesi. I'm going to be challenged in my pronunciations today, and the industry-awarded Victorian Comprehensive Cancer Centre. Prior to joining Cumulus, he worked as a senior design architect in Melbourne, where he led large-scale projects both in Australia and remotely from Indonesia. He specializes in concept design and developing geometrical elements fabricated from advanced composite materials. While living in Melbourne, Luke was actively engaged in architectural education at RMIT and Monash universities. The project we will be talking about today is the Dove Lake Viewing Shelter in Cradle Mountain, Tasmania. Nestled within the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area, the Dove Lake Viewing Shelter offers a thoughtful gateway to the dramatic landscape of Cradle Mountain. Its angular form echoes the shale rock left behind by retreating glaciers, while its scored concrete exterior recalls the glacial scars etched into the valley centuries ago. Now let's get into the details. Welcome back to Detailed. My guest today is Luke Waldron, Associate and Senior Architect at Cumulus Studio, with 4 offices in the very beautiful Australia. And the project we're talking about today is the Dove Lake Viewing Shelter in Cradle Mountain, Tasmania. Luke, welcome to Detailed. How are you today?
I'm well, thanks, Cherise. Thanks for having me on the show.
I'm thrilled to have you. I understand that you'd like to start with a little acknowledgement, and so I'm going to let you do that before we start talking about the project.
Yeah, thanks. So I would like to acknowledge the Palawa people as the traditional and original owners of Lutruwita, Tasmania. I pay my respects to the Muwinina people, the traditional custodians of the land where Nipaluna, Hobart now stands, and to the Big River Nation, the traditional custodians of the land around Cradle Mountain. I acknowledge their deep spiritual connection to country that has been maintained for over 65,000 years, and I pay my respects to their ancestors and elders, past and present. I recognize their ongoing role as the first storytellers, the first artists, and the first scientists, and we celebrate their continuing living culture and connection to country. I'd like to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded.
I love that. We could, here in the United States, could learn a little something from that. So I hope a few people do when they hear that. Let's talk about this project. Let's just start with a little background on the Dove Lake Viewing Shelter. So who is the client and what were they looking to achieve with this project?
Yeah, so the client is Parks and Wildlife Tasmania, and they're responsible for maintaining the national parks throughout the state of Tasmania. They were looking to provide an improved visitor experience to Cradle Mountain, Dove Lake in particular, and which is probably one of the most valued natural wilderness destinations within the state. It was so the Dove Lake project is a part of a key part of a master plan for the Cradle Valley area. So that was developed in 2016, and that was developed in response to growing visitor numbers and aging facilities throughout the national park. It included a wilderness village with a new visitor centre, and with new generous car parking, information centre, ticketing, and amenities, and then the Dove Lake shelter as the arrival point to the World Heritage Area location.
It's a beautiful, beautiful building. Give me a broad description of your design vision in the scope of this project.
So, due to the sensitivity of the site, it was always our vision and our priority to minimize the visual and environmental impact of the building on the site. We thought there was an opportunity to create a curated viewing experience using the building to frame different views in the landscape. So we wanted to use the building as a tool to slow the visitor down and reveal the views, and with a grand finale of revealing the lake. So the building, as you approach, the building blocks the view to the lake, but you can see the view to the mountain. And then as you enter the building, make your way through the building, then the lake is revealed kind of at the end.
Well, you did a fabulous job because when I look to the side, it's because I have the pictures of your project open here to my left. Just so you know, I'm not like reading emails while we're talking. I'm looking at one of the pictures that's further away and looking at the landscape, and it really does blend. It doesn't, usually a lot of times you'll see buildings like this out in the wilderness, and it's just this sore thumb kind of sticking out from the landscape. And if I was a little bit further away, I might not even notice there was a building there. And I think that is a testament to design. I really do, because, I don't know about you, but I want nature to stay nature. But it's lovely to have places like this to go to see it and, get history and experience it. But I don't like when it takes away. So kudos to you for that. What did the planning and programming process look like with the client for this project?
So because the site's within the World Heritage Area, there was an extensive planning process. So we had an early design phase where we engaged with the community, so local community groups as well as local Tasmanian Aboriginal groups. Then we took that feedback on board and revised the design. And we created a document called Development Proposal and Environmental Impact Assessment. So this was a quite a intense document that was produced with a number of consultants, including landscape architects, engineers, and what it did was it looked at things like biodiversity. It looked like what would the impact be, the visual impact on the environment. How would you mitigate this with, what are the strategies? What are the waste management strategies? Because it's such a sensitive environment. What are the social and economic impacts of the project? So then this was wrapped up into a report. And because it's such a significant site, then that was referred to the Federal Environment Act, which is called the EPBCA, which is the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. So it had to go through some federal planning approval, and then after that was all approved, then it went through the local planning provisions as well. And then finally the building permit provisions to actually allow us to construct it.
That only took 10 years? I know what happens when you get up to the federal level in the United States on a project. It can often take a really long time to get through all those approvals before
Correct.
you can actually do the project.
Yes, yeah, it did. It took months just for that federal approval. Luckily, we could work in the background why that was happening on the design and documentation. So we kind of, got a bit of a head start why that was all happening in the background.
Well, that helps for sure.
Yeah.
So I, of course, noticed right off the bat that this project appears to be in what looks to me like a pretty remote location. So I like to kind of work my way from the outside in. So let's start with the site that you had to work with here. Were there any challenges or limitations related to this site that had to be addressed in your design?
Yeah, there were. As you said, it is a remote site. It's in the mountains in Tasmania. It's 4.5 hours drive from Hobart. So every time you make a site trip, it's a 2-day event. To drive up there, spend half a day on site, spend the night, another half a day on site, and then drive back. Also, the site sits at 920 meters above sea level. I'm not sure what that is in feet, but
We'll figure it out later.
Yeah. But that's on the edge of an alpine environment. So snow, lots of snow in winter. It has 300 days of rain a year. So that was a huge challenge during construction and inevitably delayed the project. Also, the road from the visitor centre up to Dove Lake is a very narrow, winding road that travels through the valley. In a lot of places, it's actually single lane. So there's passing bays and what have you. So we were limited in the size of the truck, the crane, materials that we could transport to site. So that was a challenge we had to navigate. And the other thing is that the site, because it's inside the World Heritage Area and it's highly sensitive, there are extra restrictions on the builder on runoff and management of the site while it was under construction. And then so we looked at ways we could mitigate that by doing as much prefabricated work off-site and bringing it to site and limit the amount of works on site where possible.
Well, this is a good size shelter. I mean, it says shelter in the title. So when I saw the title before I looked at the photos, this is a building. It's not, you may give it the title shelter, but it is not what I imagined I would see when I opened the photo. So even with prefabricated things, looking at this facility, I'm trying to figure out how you got everything up that road. I really am. I can't even imagine how you got big trucks up there. Or did you?
Well, we did. And that was a challenge. And we almost got a truck stuck on the road because we had to get a very large crane in to lift some of the prefabricated concrete panels into place. One of the panels has quite a cantilever out over a path that comes out from under the building that links to the walking tracks. That panel was, reaching maximum size for a truck. And we had to lift that over a basement cutout to kind of the furthest point of the site. So that was a real challenge to get that crane in and that panel in place. That was kind of a big milestone, actually.
Well, and I live in Oregon where it also rains a lot. With all that rain, I would imagine those roads are even more difficult to navigate.
Yeah.
Are they paved?
Yeah, they are.
Oh, that's good.
Which is good. But in winter, obviously there's snow and ice to deal with, so that also restricts movement on those roads, and that road is can often be closed during winter. Yeah.
Don't do the easy projects, right?
Why would you?
We'd be bored, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, still focusing on the site for a minute, I dug around a little bit trying to figure out all the pieces and parts of this building. So clearly you have lighting, you have bathrooms, which means that you have water. I'm assuming you need some kind of heat. How did you get, if this is 4.5 hours to get in here, how did you get the utilities you need to this building? Like, I was a little mind boggled how you managed that.
Yeah, so that wasn't as difficult as some of the other challenges. Obviously, we have the lake there, so all the water is pumped from the lake. We put in a new pump system and new tanks hidden in the vegetation up on the hill. They were helicoptered into place to reduce impact on the site. Then we ran some new lines down to the new amenities of the toilets location. So that's all gravity fed then from those tanks. We upgraded the water then to provide drinking water. So there's an on-site UV filtration system that treats the water. So there's a drinking fountain and a bottle refill station where people can fill their water bottles and take a drink. The sewage system was already in place because there was a toilet block there before, and luckily it didn't need to be upgraded, so it didn't add any extra pressures on the budget. But all of that waste gets pumped up out of the valley along the road. Underneath the road, there's a sewer line, and then there's a treatment facility outside the World Heritage area behind the visitor centre in the valley. Power was also available on site, so that didn't need to be upgraded, which was lucky. Telecommunications was an issue, so we had to set up a new aerial relay system to get that signal into the valley, which is important for a number of reasons. Firstly, through construction, we needed to have communications because of the remoteness of the site. But also, people need to have phone reception in that area because it is a remote location. And if they're out walking, they need to be able to contact emergency services.
Are there wild animals? It just, I'm like, okay, I keep looking at these pictures. It doesn't look like there's anything for miles around.
There are a lot of wombats in the area, if you know what a wombat is.
I've heard of a wombat. I cannot pull up a picture in my brain of a wombat, but you can be assured that I'm doing some homework as soon as we get off this call. Do wombats attack? I don't even know
No,
is this a flying thing? It
no,
doesn't fly,
no,
does it? No.
no. It's a chubby little. Well, they're not that little. They're quite big, actually. It's like the size of a dog, but they're quite round and they've got really small legs and they kind of waddle, and they dig burrows. And yeah, there's lots of them around Cradle Mountain.
That doesn't sound particularly scary, though.
No,
No.
they're very cute, actually.
Okay, I like cute. I have coyotes behind my house and cougars and bobcats.
Oh, wow.
So those are not always so cute. They're pretty to look at from far away, but I don't want to run into them on my walking trail. So let's talk about, before we start moving into the building, did you do anything particular in your design on the exterior of this building? On your site design, are there any exterior spaces to view the surroundings or anything special you did there?
Yeah. So it's probably worth pointing out that the building footprint sits on the existing car park. So it's a previously disturbed location. And what we actually managed to do was have a net positive impact on the environment by rehabilitating more of the site than was previously disturbed. So within that, the site design consists of a bus drop-off location and bus turning circle, because all visitors now get bussed in to the site. Due to the road and there having been some bad accidents on the road, it's now for the most part, people are bussed in. So we needed a shelter for people to wait for the bus. And so that's coupled with the amenities, the new amenities, which had to be upgraded uh, to allow for the new visitor numbers that are ever growing. Then there's a new network of paths up around the shelter, which connect into all of the walking paths, and some viewing locations. There's also an accessible path from the viewing shelter down to the lake, which allows for people in wheelchairs or less abled bodies to then go down and experience the lake. So that was also a priority for the site design.
So as part of my day job, I write specifications for a building enclosure consulting firm. So I'm always a little bit extra interested in your enclosure design and what you did with the exterior of your building, what you did to make it a good, tight building. Tell me a little bit about your exterior design and some of the materials you chose, and just kind of paint me a picture of what you did with your enclosure on this building.
Yeah, sure. So the building, it draws inspiration from the landscape. As we mentioned before, we always intended that the building would be embedded in the landscape and eventually become part of the landscape. That was really important. So the building's form draws inspiration from shale rock in the area, and this is deposited from the glacial movement through the valley, which carved the valley, and the glacier left its scars on the valley, and you can see that in the rock on site. These kind of scores, and so we were really inspired by this aesthetic, and we wanted to interpret that and use it as our kind of primary driver for the design. So, in the same way that the rock is scored, we textured the concrete to the exterior of the building. This was a process that we actually built into the specification. Um, we didn't know what the outcome would be, but we built in a testing kind of time and cost into the specification. So we had a number of weeks, we had a number of panels that would be allowed, and we went into a concrete precast factory, and we tested different ways to texture the concrete. So we fabricated different types of kind of raking devices and rollers, and the final outcome of that was a custom designed concrete roller that was made out of like a plastic material. We made them in two sizes, so we could do small sections of the panels, and so the panels were all hand rolled to get that texture, which gives quite an organic appearance. It's different to a form liner, which is very controlled. This is, has a lot of character.
It absolutely does. It's beautiful. I would never have even thought of doing something like that.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, we didn't know where we were going to end up. So it was really a trial and error testing phase. The other thing worth noting is that we added a black oxide to the concrete. So the concrete is much darker than standard concrete, and that reflects the surrounding rock in the valley to try and help reinforce that idea of embedding the building into the landscape.
Well, and it really does. I don't know how to say what I'm trying to say, but it does adding that really does make it look more natural and less like a slab of concrete. The picture I'm looking at right now is with the rocks in the distance right behind it. It looks like you also have some, is that wood? Or I know they have a lot of products now that look like wood, but on the exterior, coming off at least one area of that concrete, that you have some wood on the exterior as well.
Yeah, that's right. So we looked at Tasmanian timber species, um, and the timber detailing throughout the building creates a counterpoint to the cold concrete. So it gives a warmth. Um, so those timber kind of touch points are targeted to areas like the entry, like the doors, like the seats, to really kind of complement the cold kind of concrete of which reflects the landscape. So yeah, that was really conscious part
Was
of the
there,
design.
just out of curiosity, I mean, we put wood on everything in Oregon. I mean, everything's built with wood. Was there any concern? But moisture here is an issue because it rains a lot. Did you do anything special with the wood? With because you have more rain there than we do. I didn't know there was anywhere that had more rain than we do. But 300 days a year of rain. What did you have to do with the wood to keep it protected from that?
Yeah, so we used a natural penetrating oil that penetrates the wood and protects it. It does need to be recoated every 12 to 18 months as part of the maintenance. Um, and then there are specific types of wood that you can use outside that has a certain rating and a lifespan. So there are Tasmanian timbers that you would only use inside, and then yeah, other timbers that you can use inside and outside. So we look to those timbers because of the harsh environment, and we wanted to design a building that stands the test of time.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I've personally have never worked with Tasmanian timber, so it's like, okay, tell me about the wood. Um, Before we move to the inside of the building, so you said that this is, can get pretty cold in the wintertime. Did you up your level of glazing to help with, temperature control? Or were you able to use, like, what did you do with the glass to mitigate temperatures?
Yeah, so it's probably worth noting that the building, the primary function of the building is a shelter. So there's actually no heating in the building. It's cold. Um, the only mechanical system is an anti-condensation system, which services the viewing windows to keep them free of condensation fog. Um, and that only warms up the air slightly to be a slightly tempered temperature, and that's really about anti-condensation. The glazing that we used is the whole building is double glazed. So even though it is cold, it does protect you from the elements. And there are certain spots in the building which face the north, which allows for good solar penetration. So you can sit behind the glass, and really in winter the sun comes through and really warms you up.
Interesting. I'm hearing all kinds of things I've never thought about. I'm pretty sure that I've never worked on a project with an anti-condensation system either. And I worked in an MEP firm for 6.5 years. That one's new to me too. I have that system on my car, but I don't know that I've ever designed one or worked on one where it was designed for the building. Before we move inside, tell me from a design perspective, what was the most challenging, strictly related to design? We'll talk about construction in a minute, but what was the most challenging things that you had to face in the design of this structure?
I think one of the biggest challenge was working through all the different elements that we could design to be constructed off-site. So working through that design process, looking at all the constraints, looking at the size of the truck we could get in, looking at the narrow road, looking at the size of the crane, working with the engineers to look at the size of the panels. So all the panels and elements could be designed and constructed, designed to be constructed off-site and then craned in place as much as possible. So we're looking at the crane lifting constraints, panel weights, panel lengths. So how all these pieces of the building would come together, and we would minimize all of the work on site.
I can't imagine that was easy. I mean, you have this building you want to design, but then you have to break things into pieces and parts small enough, and then make those come together into that building so that you can do that off-site, and then have it be small enough to get on trucks that you could actually get up there. I imagine some spots were like, okay, it's time to get everybody together and figure out how we're going to make this happen. So tell me about the interior of this building. What would I see? What are the spaces, and what would I see walking through the interior of this building?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned before, we designed the interior to be a curated viewing experience. So it's really the views and the windows through the building that lead you on this path. That also meant that we would need less signage in the building because you're really attracted to the windows. So from the arrival point, when you walk into the building, there's a large window that frames the part of the valley. So as you move towards that window, it then reveals a corridor, and then you can see light at the end of the corridor. So using that technique, we could minimize all signage, directional signage through the building. So the building is deliberately kept dark, and that creates a contrast between the interior and the exterior, and all of the windows become apertures then into the landscape, reinforcing this idea of connection to landscape and the framing of the views. A lot of the lighting within the building is kept low, so it's low lighting hidden within the precast panels, which then floods the floor. But there's very little lighting from above within the building. Then the building's deliberately devoid of decoration and modern comforts. It is primarily a shelter, and we wanted it to feel like a connection of caves in a way, and reinforce this idea of rock, landscape, and have geological references throughout the building. So we have if you look at the plan, there's a large crack that runs through part of the building. So as you walk past it, you can see this fissure running through. It looks like the building's been split apart, and there's a and that lines up with the window to the viewing chamber, so you can see the light that kind of comes through there. There's also a change in depth to the formwork of the precast panels on the inside. So it's just reinforcing this idea of geological shifting, tectonic plates. So there's subtle depth changes in all the walls, and the ceiling of the building as well, which is also in situ formed concrete. So yeah, it does. It was about reflecting the landscape as much as possible.
In one spot on the inside, I just lost the picture. There it is. carved into the concrete wall, and I can only see half of it in this particular picture, but there's two statements. And the first one says always was. And I can't see what the rest of it is around the curve. In this picture, what does that represent something? What does that mean? There's some handprints as well.
Yeah, so that was part of the engagement with the Tasmanian Aboriginal community. And so we cast into those concrete walls, always was, always will be. And that is a phrase used to describe that Australian land was never ceded by Aboriginal people. It was stolen. So, yeah, it's a really powerful phrase. And we, along with the Tasmanian Aboriginal people, thought that that would be a really powerful statement to have in the building. So I think the photo that you may be looking at is from shortly after the opening of the building, where we had Tasmanian Aboriginal community up on site, and they did a smoking ceremony to open the building, and then they put the handprints using their decoration, traditional kind of ceremonial decoration paint, which is like an earth ochre, and they painted that and put their handprints on the building to kind of, open the building.
The first picture I looked at was just in the concrete gray, but as you were telling me about it, I found the picture of them there doing that, putting that on the wall. But I think that's a beautiful way to honor them as well. And it's such a beautiful space. You achieved exactly what you intended to by having it darker and stark, because I've been sitting here as you're talking, looking at this and seeing it in a whole nother light. And like this, a couple of the spaces where you're looking out, the outdoors really pops. It really, you feel enveloped in that. But yet the space inside, as simple as it is really a beautiful space. I'm a minimalist, so I'm in love with this shelter. I am absolutely in love with this shelter. But it feels like if I were sitting there, it would be a very powerful moment. That the space has given you kind of the space and breathing room to have that powerful moment. And maybe I'm crazy, but that's what I'm getting just from pictures. So I can only imagine what it's like to be there. Some of our best lessons learned come during the actual construction phase of the project. Now, I'm sure you've got all kinds of good stories about this one. And I know that in these remote locations, the stories typically get better. I've had a few that are in remote locations, and some of the crazy things they had to do to make things happen during construction. Tell me a little bit about the construction phase. And you already mentioned that there were some delays due to the weather and road closing, things like that. Tell me about how the construction phase of this project went.
Yeah, so there were lots of challenges, mostly due to the remoteness of the site. We also have a lot of concrete on site, which is, you don't get a second chance with concrete. So, and because we don't have any lining on the inside of the building, we had to get the concrete formwork and the pours right the first time. When we poured the first part of the building slab, we noticed some minor cracking in the concrete as it cured. At that point, we actually put the project on hold, or any more concrete pouring on hold, until we worked out what the issues were. The remoteness of the site meant a number of things, that we were outside of the Australian standard time for picking up concrete from the batch plant and pouring it. So that was a challenge. And there were also, because the batch plant is down at the coast, which is at sea level, so there's a difference in humidity, there's a difference in temperature from when you pick up the concrete to when you pour it. So we had to really think about that when we designed the mix and put different kinds of retardants in it to stop it from going off too quickly or too slowly. So as to help us mitigate this challenge or navigate this challenge, we brought in a concrete specialist, and we worked with them to design the mix and the additives so we could get it right. And part of that was there couldn't be more than a certain degree of temperature differentiation between the coast and the mountain. So each pour had to have the right weather conditions, the right temperature conditions, and yeah, that mix design that would work with those within those kind of variables. That was a big challenge, but we got there in the end. Yeah.
So, I don't know if it's different there, but one of the challenges that we're facing in the US for construction is uh, lack of skilled labor. We went through a very big phase in the United States for quite some time where, like, our high schools used to have auto shops and wood shops and things like that, and they changed them all to computer labs at the advent of the computer, 25 years ago or whenever that was. Um, and the focus really became around computers, and there was much less of a push for our young people to go into the trades. And now we're suffering because of that. And so just finding skilled labor, even in the middle of a big city, enough skilled labor for whatever construction is going on, is difficult. But then you get to a remote location and it gets very expensive and very difficult to get the people you need to do the work. Did you have any challenges like that in this location?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, so we started construction just before COVID hit as well. Um, so all of that was compounded, um, along with material shortages, supply chain issues, material costs rising by 30%, all of these challenges. But yes, skilled labor was an issue. Also, we found that because people weren't traveling, they were spending money they would usually spend on holidays upgrading their houses. So there was an extra demand for those um, for those trades, which meant that there was an even further shortage. Prices were going up. So that was a real challenge that the builder had to navigate. Luckily, they were a well-established builder on the northwest, or throughout Tasmania, particularly on the northwest coast, which is the closest kind of populated area to Cradle Mountain and where a lot of the builders traveled up from each day. So they had good connections, and they could, I believe they had to reel in some favors at times to really get this project over the line. But they were a really good bunch of people, and they did a really good job.
What would you say was your biggest lesson learned from this project that made you a better architect on the next project?
I think there were lots of lessons learned, particularly around concrete. Um, but I think one of the key things that made this project a success, and made me a better architect at the same time, was the relationship that we had with the builder. I think fostering a really good, healthy working relationship with the builder was paramount to getting this project across the line and successfully. Um, with the remote location, it was even more important. And then on top of that, you've got the concrete, which is completely unforgiving. So without that trust and that rapport, without the builder stopping, pausing, asking questions, calling me for set out information, that it could have been a disaster. So yeah, that was really key to the success of the project. And because we had the challenge of the telecommunications on site, at one point we had a video call, but the audio and the video wouldn't work at the same time. So we had video on one device, we had audio on the phone, and he's walking through the building with a tape measure, trying to get a set out point. I'm in Hobart on my computer in the 3D model. And he's saying, I need this, and I'm giving it to him in real time. And, without that, it would not have been the project it was.
Everything you've been telling me between we can only transport concrete in certain kinds of weather days, and we don't have service up there for our phones half the time, just roads that close, and it rains a lot. I don't know how you got it done, to be perfectly honest. How long did it take to finish the project once you started construction?
So excuse me, we originally forecasted 12 months, and it took the better part of 2 years to finish. In fact, there are still a couple of ongoing things up there with extra pieces of boardwalk infrastructure that link into the tracks, that have been added to the contract along the way. But yeah, there were some major delays due to those things that we discussed earlier, the weather, the concrete, and it took a lot longer than expected.
Well, applause for you for surviving it in one piece, because I could just see, and I think that you said something really important. Your relationships matter. And having that good relationship with the contractor and with your owners, and being able to sit down and figure these things out. Anybody's going to look at this project from day one and know it's not going to go perfectly smoothly. It's not set up for that. And those relationships are really what are going to be what makes a difference. Clearly it did here, because it's gorgeous.
Thank you.
So before we get to our 2 closing questions, tell me, this is a chance to celebrate your firm. Tell me what Cumulus Studio is working on now that I get to call you about later to come back and talk to me.
So yeah, we've got a number of offices throughout Australia. We've got 2 in Tasmania, Adelaide and Melbourne, on the main kind of island of Australia. We are doing lots of residential work, mostly out of our Launceston office in the north of Tasmania. We've recently picked up some school projects. We do lots of tourism projects, and we've picked up a few new tourism projects. But I suppose the major project that we're working on at the moment is a multi-purpose sports stadium for Hobart, which is a large infrastructure project that will replace some aging infrastructure and put it in a key location, which is accessible to the city. So we're working with a Melbourne architect, Cox, who are very experienced in stadia design, and that's in design phase at the moment, and planning concurrently. And yeah, so that'll allow us to get a team in the Australian Football League, and that'll be their new home, and it'll kind of reinvigorate an old port part of the city that has been an industrial kind of wasteland for the better part of 10 years. So yeah, that's really exciting.
Okay, I have to ask, when you say football, do you mean football or do you mean soccer?
I mean Australian rules football. which is different to American football and different to soccer. It's
So
another game that we play here. But the stadium will allow for rectangular, because it's played on an oval like cricket. But the rectangular sports will fit within the oval. So we'll be able to set up an American football pitch, a soccer pitch, rugby pitch. So that's why it's a multi-purpose sporting facility.
I had to ask. I have a good friend from Germany, and he's always calling soccer football, and it becomes this big argument every time. There's not football. I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan. That's not football. I'm a soccer fan as well, but quit calling it football. So I always close with two questions, one being a broader industry question, and then my final question. And I like to ask questions that will help our younger architects better navigate the industry as they come out of school and enter the workforce. And I feel like our younger architects are often overwhelmed when they walk into a firm and they go, wait a minute, I didn't learn any of this in school. I learned how to design, and what do you mean I have to know all this other stuff? What advice would you give a young architecture student or a young architect, fairly new to the industry, about things they could do earlier rather than later in their career to make the transition into real world practice a little easier?
Yeah. I guess my advice would be to go back to first principles and understand why you studied design and architecture in the first place. I think a lot of the other technical stuff that'll come over time, but I think traveling and experiencing great architecture in person, that experience cannot be underestimated in the way that it can have an effect on you. It's like a lecturer used to say at my university, he was like, learn and be inspired by the masters. So get out there and experience those great buildings and understand why you love design and architecture, and the rest will come.
Great advice. So, final question, easiest question of the day. I'm being sarcastic. I hope that we all hope to live a life that leaves some kind of contribution to make the world a better place. Personal or professional, what do you hope your impact will be?
Yeah, so I think that design is really powerful, and I think it inherently affects all of us. I think that good design can have a hugely positive impact on the way we live our lives. So, having said that, if I can make a contribution through that to people's lives, then I think that would make me a happy architect.
Well, I will say, Luke, I think you did a fantastic job of that with this project. Because I can actually look at these pictures and picture myself sitting on those wood steps or risers or that in that area and looking out and being moved or being calmed or just experiencing nature. And I don't think there's enough to be said for those moments. They really are day changing, or for some people life changing, or just helping you find your perspective in life again. So congratulations on an incredible project. If I can ever find a way to get over to Australia, I'll see if I can't manage to stop by and check it out. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about this today. It's really incredible. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again. You don't need an invite. Just drop me a line and say, hey, Cherise, I got a great project. You want to chat? I'd love to have you back.
Well, thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.